Introduction about myself. So I'm Myira Khan. I work as a counsellor and a supervisor, and I also run and founded the MCAPN, which is the Muslim Counsellor and Psychotherapist Network. So just for a few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about mental health and Ramadan. Now, what I want to first of all do is acknowledge the real difficulties and challenges that Ramadan can have on people's mental health. I think we are kind of almost bombarded with expectations that Ramadan is meant to be this amazing, enlightening, uplifting month. And I think it can be, but I think that works if we kind of have the right conditions in place and we are in the right mindset and we have just the real kind of really good positive factors that allows us to make the most of this month. But I really want to acknowledge, though, that it can really challenge our mental health, and not only for people that already have mental health issues, but I think Ramadan can bring on people's challenges because we're much more attuned to ourselves. The very nature of Ramadan is that actually it's spiritual self-care, and the moment we take away all of those external needs, the food, the drink, and other things that we're not permitted when we fast, I think what it does is it strips away all those distractions in a way. And so it actually allows us to spend more time with ourselves, with our own soul. And so that in itself can trigger and bring up a lot of concerns and issues for people. So I really first of all want to acknowledge that it actually can be a really difficult month for a lot of people. So ordinarily it can be difficult, and then let's just throw into the mix as well that we're also doing Ramadan at home as well, so we're in lockdown. So this also brings on all those extra challenges. And the main thing, for obvious reasons, is that there is a huge loss at the moment, and we're experiencing that loss of the real support and structure which normally helps us through the month, whether that's going to the mosque, whether that's meeting up with friends for iftar, if that's meeting up with and going around to family and friends' homes to break fast. So on top of Ramadan, as we quote unquote here normally experience it, we've also got additional losses and griefs and bereavements in a way that we're having to deal with. So I kind of want to acknowledge that as well. So a lot of our, in a way, support systems have also been taken away. On the flip side of that, though, Ramadan really is a spiritual self-care month. But I also want to acknowledge in that it's also about taking care of our mental health and also our emotional health in that as well. I think very often when we think about mental health, we think about our mind. That's one part of our being, one part of our soul in the sense of our experience of the world. But I also want to, as I said, acknowledge that we also have this emotional health as well. And so I want to really highlight these three areas. So Ramadan at home, if we can see it as spiritual self-care, if we can see it as taking care of our mental health, but thirdly, and also just as importantly, it's also about taking care of our emotional health. Now, the moment we see that it's these three combined that we're actually practicing, that we're actually implementing during Ramadan, it actually really highlights for me what Ramadan's all about. And for me, I call it this, which is soul food. I talk a lot about this in a lot of the workshops that I deliver through my work as a therapist and as a coach. And soul food really is about what are we feeding our soul? What are we feeding ourselves, our being, our sense of self, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally? Very often in Ramadan, I think all of a sudden we almost kind of purge in a way on spiritual soul food. I think for a lot of people, it's about reconnecting to the faith, reconnecting to whether that's through prayer, whether that's through reading the Quran, or learning more about our faith. So I think Ramadan offers us a lot of opportunity for spiritual soul food. However, it's the mental soul food and the emotional soul food that often goes lacking during this month, or rather, it doesn't get as much emphasis or focus, and we don't get enough feed of it in a way. So what I absolutely, and I know this slide here kind of looks a bit overwhelming, but what I want to acknowledge is that when it comes to emotional health and mental health, we actually have these 10 emotional needs and they're listed on this slide in front of you. And these 10 emotional needs, if we feed ourselves enough of them and we get all of these in balance, then that actually helps us to feel and feel in balance with our emotional and mental health. And the reason I put them in jars, it's a bit like, how much are we filling up these jars of our emotional needs? So how much privacy do we get in our lives, for example? How much connection do we experience in our lives? Do we get enough attention? And I mean good, positive attention here rather than feeding our ego. Do we feel that we have meaning in our lives? Do we feel we have a sense of control? So just as we go around this slide, I'm sure all of you are looking at these different needs. And what each of you can do after today, so takeaway, one of the takeaways from today, which is, out of these 10 emotional needs, am I meeting them all? Am I feeding myself enough of them? Because if there is a lack in any of these, then we have an imbalance. This has a direct impact on whether we are feeling emotionally and mentally healthy. And again, on top of that, not only are we needing to meet these 10 emotional needs, but actually, how do we meet them in lockdown and how do we meet them in Ramadan? So it's about finding ways, being quite creative and finding ways to meet these needs. And I'm happy to kind of share this slide with people after today, or I'll stick it on my social media so you can find it there. So for Ramadan and for our mental health, emotional health, for our spiritual self-care, it's about ways to feed ourselves soul food, as I mentioned. So very quickly, here's a list of some of the ways you can feed your soul, ways you can feed yourself soul food during Ramadan to help your emotional health. So the first thing I've mentioned is to meet these emotional needs. So for example, if we take privacy as one, it's about, how do I put a boundary in that allows me to have privacy, time on my own, away from family or people in the home that I'm in lockdown with, but also where do I meet the other need of community and connection? So just putting in a boundary allows us to go, how much of my privacy emotional need can I meet, and how much of my community and connection emotional needs can I meet? Another thing with boundaries and limits especially is, it's about understanding what are our limits, what is our optimal amount of soul food or emotional need are we meeting, so that we actually get enough of it without feeling overwhelmed. For example, if we go back to the privacy and the community and connection needs, we might spend either too much time with other people or equally too much time on our own. So you can start to see where we need to start putting boundaries and limits in to make sure that we're meeting all of these needs optimally. A couple of other things here that you can think about during this month as well is one of gratitude and abundance. Now, gratitude is something I talk a lot about because the more grateful we are, the more abundant we feel in what we're being blessed with, which only makes us more and more grateful. And of course, it goes with that saying about count your blessings. So one thing I would really advocate and recommend is to keep a gratitude journal. And that simply is, at the end of each day, write a list of 10 things that you are grateful for today. And if you do that every day, what you're actually doing is feeding yourself some positive soul food, and you're actually rewiring your brain to feel positive. A couple of other things quickly for me to go through on the list. Mindfulness. Not only is that about being mindfulness in our practice, such as in our prayer, which we try to do, but I'm talking here about being much more conscious and much more self-aware, about not being on autopilot, being much more intentional about what we're doing throughout the day. Having exercise and rest. So again, the optimal amount of exercise, but match that, balance that with rest. Another couple of things that you need to think about as well is the doing versus the being. This is about when we're busy doing, when we're being active, we're not really in tune with or allowing ourselves just to be with ourselves. So again, a lot of mindfulness practice, prayer, reading, journaling, reflection, time out in nature, going for a walk, things that allow us just to be, is a way of us spending time with our soul, feeding our soul. Another balance is between work and hobbies, and time out as well. Again, there's something, especially in lockdown, that we can often lose that boundary between the distinction of work and home life. And so we might find ourselves working more. So again, intentionally be conscious, intentionally set boundaries between work and home time, as well as your hobbies and interests. And as I said as well, the last point as well is about me time and we time. So time to yourself and time together with other people. So I hope that helps you really quickly just to think about ways to help feed yourself some soul food, which allows you to lift your mental health, really give yourself that emotional and mental real nurturing and feed that we need in order to feel healthy. So as I'm saying, soul food is about a balanced diet for your soul. And I hope that helps you all.
Thank you so much. I think there was a lot there for us to take away and reflect on, which has been really, really helpful. We have one question that's come in so far. Yeah. How do we support family members who have been self-isolating for 7 weeks now and are anxious about going out and getting back to normal? People who are anxious to even go outside for exercise, scared that they're going to come into contact with people and contract the virus. What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, a couple of things in that. One, which is understanding how much we are actually in control of that, of the second point I was going to make about a phased return back to the outside world in a way. Be, again, really intentional and mindful about what is it that I am in control of that allows me to feel safe when I go out. So, such as face masks and protective gear, again, social distancing, but also we're not expected to go from 0 to 100 and back to normality straight away. So again, it's about give yourself that opportunity to go out at times during the day that feel safer for you, where you feel there's going to be less people around, or go places that you know, go to a park or walk, just walk around the block if it's quiet enough. Give yourself the opportunity to slowly reintroduce yourself back into your external world. I think that's the best way, because that allows you to feel in control then of that transition back into the real world as such.